Most of us grew up knowing the story. A man in colorful clothes walks into a town infested with rats. He plays a tune on his flute. The rats follow him into the river, and they drown. The town refuses to pay him, so he plays the tune again. But this time, the rats don't follow him. The children do, and they are never seen again.
We tell this story to kids as a fairy tale, a warning about paying your debts, or a bedtime story to make them behave. But here is the part that Disney doesn't tell you. Here is the part that history books try to bury in the footnotes. The Pied Piper wasn't a fairy tale. He was real. The town of Hamelin is real. And the date, June 26, 1284, is carved into the town's official records.
This isn't a metaphor. On that specific day, 130 children actually walked out of the gates of Hamelin and vanished from the face of the earth. There is a stained glass window in the town church that dates back to the year 1300. It doesn't show magic, and it doesn't show a happy ending. It depicts a man in multicolored clothes leading a procession of children into a cave. And underneath, in the town's oldest chronicle, there is an entry written by a terrifyingly shaken hand that reads, "It has been 10 years since our children left."
So if magic isn't real, and the flute didn't have hypnotic powers, then what actually happened on June 26th? Who was the man in the multicolored coat? Was he a serial killer with a method so efficient he took an entire generation in one afternoon? Was he a recruiter for a children's crusade that ended in slaughter? Or was he something much worse?
Tonight, we aren't reading a storybook. We are opening a cold case file that has been frozen for 700 years. Because the scariest thing about the Pied Piper isn't the music, it's the fact that the parents watched them go. Welcome to St. Grave. Let's enter Hamelin. He didn't look like a savior. The records describe him as tall, gaunt, and terrifyingly thin, but it was his clothes that stopped people in the street. He wore a coat made of pied cloth, a patchwork of clashing, violent colors, red, yellow, green, and blue all stitched together in a chaotic pattern. In the 13th century, this wasn't a fashion statement. This was the mark of an outcast. Jesters, executioners, and madmen wore pied clothing. It was a warning sign. He walked straight to the town hall. He didn't speak to the guards. He didn't look at the starving merchants. He stood before the mayor and the town council, and he made them an offer that sounded impossible. He said, "I can rid your city of every single rat. Not one will remain, but my price is high." He demanded 1,000 guilders. To give you context, 1,000 guilders in 1284 was an absolute fortune. You could buy a farm, a house, and cattle with that money. It was more than the entire yearly budget of the town guard. But the mayor was desperate. The rats were eating the city alive. The people were on the verge of rioting. So the mayor didn't negotiate. He didn't hesitate. He looked the stranger in the eye and said, 1,000 guilders? If you do this, we will give you 2,000. The piper didn't smile. He didn't shake hands. He simply pulled a small wooden flute from his sleeve and walked out into the street. Now, the legend says, he played a beautiful song. But historical accounts suggest it was something else. Witnesses described a shrill, piercing sound, a frequency that set human teeth on edge. It wasn't music, it was a signal.
And it worked. First, one rat crawled out of the sewers, then 10, then hundreds. They poured out of the cellars, the attics, the granaries. A black, living carpet of fur and claws, screeching and fighting to get closer to the sound. The piper didn't stop. He walked slowly toward the Weser River, never breaking his tune. The rats followed, hypnotized by the noise, driven by a compulsion they couldn't resist. He led them to the water's edge, and he stepped aside.
The rats plunged into the freezing water, thousands of them drowning in the current, swept away by the river. By sunset, the streets were silent. The scratching and the walls had stopped. For the first time in months, Hamelin was clean. The town erupted in celebration. They rang the church bells, they opened the wine barrels. The nightmare was over.
But the next morning, the piper returns to the town hall. He stood before the mayor, his work done, his hand out, waiting for his payment. But the mayor was no longer desperate. The rats were dead. The danger was gone. And suddenly, 1,000 guilders seemed a lot of money to give to a homeless drifter in a clown coat. The mayor laughed in his face. He said, "We won't give you 1,000 guilders, we'll give you 50. He told the piper to take the 50 coins and leave, or he would be thrown in the dungeon for extortion. He thought he was dealing with a beggar. He thought he had the upper hand. He didn't realize he had just broken a contract with a monster." The piper didn't argue. He didn't shout. He simply put the 50 coins in his pocket, turned around, and walked out of the city. As he left, he turned to the guards at the gate and whispered one sentence. "I have cleared your rats. Now I will clear your future." He vanished into the woods, and for 3 days, nothing happened. Sunday, June 26th, was the day of St. John and Paul. The adults were all in church. The streets were empty. And then the flute started playing again.
It was 7 a.m. Sunday morning, the feast of St. John and Paul. Every adult in Hamelin was inside the church, attending High Mass. The streets were deserted. The shops were closed. The town was silent. This was calculated. The piper knew exactly where the parents would be. He knew he had a 1-hour window where no one would stop him.
When he walked back through the gates, he wasn't wearing the multicolored coat anymore. The chronicles say he was dressed as a hunter. He wore a strange red hat and a grim gray cloak. His face was terrible to look at, described as fierce and burning. He didn't go to the town hall. He went to the residential district, and he lifted the flute to his lips. This time, the song wasn't shrill. It wasn't the piercing noise that drove the rats crazy. It was soft, sweet, a melody that sounded like laughter. And just like the rats, the reaction was instant. Doors opened. Children aged 4 to 12 stepped out into the morning sun. They weren't dragged out. They weren't crying or screaming for help. They were running. They were clapping. They looked ecstatic, as if they were being called to the greatest party of their lives.
130 children.
The sons and daughters of the mayor, the councilmen, the merchants, an entire generation of Hamelin. They formed a line behind the hunter. He didn't look back. He just played his tune and marched toward the east gate, toward the Koppenberg mountain. And the children followed, skipping and dancing, disappearing into the woods, one by one.
Now you might wonder, if they all vanished, how do we know this happened? Because one boy was left behind. History remembers him as the lame child. He had an injured leg and was on crutches. He tried to run. He tried to keep up with his friends. He could hear the music, and he said it filled him with a desire so strong it felt like burning. But he was too slow. By the time he hobbled to the edge of the mountain, the procession was gone. The rocks had closed. The music had faded. He was the only one left standing in the silence.
Imagine the scene an hour later. The church doors open. The parents walk out feeling holy, feeling safe. They go home to prepare Sunday lunch, and they find silence. Empty beds. Toys dropped in the middle of the street. Cold breakfasts sitting on the table. The panic didn't start immediately. They thought the kids were playing, but as minutes turned into hours and no laughter was heard, the screaming started.
The lame child made his way back to town. He found the mayor. He told him exactly what he saw. They went into the mountain, he said. He took them into the dark. The mayor sent search parties. They combed the woods for weeks. They screamed their children's names until their voices gave out. They found nothing. No bodies, no footprints, no scraps of clothing. 130 children were simply erased from existence.
This is where the fairy tale ends. But for St. Grave, this is where the investigation begins. Because historians don't believe in magic flutes, they believe in cause and effect. So what actually happened to those 130 children? Over the last 700 years, 3 theories have emerged. And trust me, the magic explanation is comforting compared to the truth. Let's look at theory number 1, the plague.
So, what actually happened? Historians have spent centuries trying to decode the metaphor. Theory number 1, the Black Death. Many scholars believe the piper wasn't a man at all. He was a symbol. In medieval art, death was often depicted as a skeleton wearing colorful, tattered clothes. The rats weren't literal rats. They were the carriers of the plague. And the children disappearing into a cave was a poetic way of describing mass graves. It makes sense. The timing aligns with plague outbreaks in Europe. But there is a problem with this theory. The town records don't mention disease. They don't mention funerals. They specifically say the children left.
Historians believe the Pied Piper was a locator. He didn't use magic. He used a silver tongue. He came to Hamelin, a town of filth and poverty, and he promised the young generation a better life, land of their own, freedom from their parents' debts. The music was his sales pitch. And the mayor? When he refused to pay the rat catcher fee, perhaps the locator took his revenge by stealing the town's most valuable resource, its workforce. Those 130 children didn't walk into a magic mountain. They were marched hundreds of miles east into forced labor, never to see their families again.
But whether they died of plague or were stolen by a recruiter, the trauma left a scar on Hamelin that never healed. And this brings us to the final piece of evidence, the one thing that proves this wasn't just a story. If you go to Hamelin, Germany today, you can walk down a specific street called the Bungeloschenstrasse. Translated, it means the street without drums.
It is the exact street where the children were last seen walking toward the gate. And for the last 740 years, there has been a law in Hamelin. No music is allowed on that street. You cannot play a radio, you cannot sing, you cannot dance. Even wedding processions stop their band when they cross it. It is a zone of eternal silence. A permanent memorial to the day the music stopped and the children didn't come home.
The Pied Piper serves as a grim reminder that the most terrifying monsters aren't the ones under the bed. They are the ones who smile, play a beautiful tune, and promise us a better life. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the dark side of history, leave a like and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, do you think he was a recruiter or something worse? This is Saint Grave. Don't follow the music.